Okay, so this is the reference that will be provided to you for your male sculpt, your male torso sculpt this week, along with measurements of this guy's landmarks, distance between landmarks. Okay, so what we have is pretty much 8 views of a fairly muscular and defined guy doing a slight twist at the waist, and his arms are raised overhead, right? So the implications for us and what we have to kind of consider as far as form goes throughout the different angles of this pose are, one, how the landmarks are falling, right? So I'm just going to start in the center to be very simple about it, and we're going to look at this down to here. Then we'll start to see the break in the rib cage. Right, we don't see a lot of break in the rib cage because it's quite muscular through the stomach, and it's hiding a lot of the costal cartilage. Also, he's doing a little bit of a twist at the waist, so his external obliques are active, right? So they are kind of pushing against the costal cartilage and the ribs. So you're not seeing those. You're seeing volumes of muscle along the sides of his body, right? So keep our eye out for that, for these different poses. Okay, so rib cage coming down, costal cartilage. Looking for the anterior superior iliac spine. We're looking at it right here, and right here, and right here. I'm going back like this. Remember I said to pay attention to the gesture of the iliac crest. That's what we're trying to capture, because that's going to set up this nice mass of external oblique coming up, right? Kind of this nice square mass, and we know that this is going back to grab onto ribs. Okay, so that's the iliac crest through here in the front and on this side. So just kind of quickly notice for me the difference between this external oblique, which is nice and teardrop shaped, getting twisted back, and this external oblique, which is pulling the body around this way. So this one is active, twisting the body around, and so this is what I was saying about it being more oriented, the fibers vertically, versus this one are really getting pulled way back. Okay, so this is the active side, and then this is the passive side, which is getting stretched. Okay, so that's what we're looking for in the external obliques. Look at the digitations here. They're not quite as pronounced and perfect as you would expect, or you would do naively if you were just doing this just from imagination. And this is the realism part that we're trying to achieve, right? So we have strong interdigitation up here with the serratus anterior. And while we're on the serratus anterior, I just need you guys to be a little bit perceptive for a minute and look for me at what we have here. This guy has massive serratus anterior and slightly less massive serratus anterior on the other side. In fact, there's probably a strange adaptation going on between the two, because on this side, his right side, he's missing the third characteristic digit down here, which he has on his right side. So we have 6th rib, 7th rib, 8th rib on this side. On this side we have 6th rib, 7th rib, but no 8th rib. So very interesting, and something that you would notice, I guarantee, I hope you would notice as you proceed with this sculpt. Up here, this is the serratus anterior at the level of the chest. So this is the one at the level of the 5th rib. I said you would see it sometimes on the raised arm. Well, that time is right now, because you can see as the chest elevates, you can start to see this digit there. Okay, so back on track. External obliques, we've talked about them. Okay, let's move to how they interdigitate. We saw this. We saw these volumes. That brings us up to the chest, right? And the chest is going to look a little different than we saw in the plates, right? Because the arm is raised. And so we're getting a flow of muscle that doesn't go down to a lowered arm, but goes to an insertion point out here on both of these, right? So from our three distinct origins, we're getting a pull out this way. Remember, it's going over the biceps, right? So you need to get your biceps coming underneath, down this way. And then the deltoid is adjacent to it. Remember the front deltoid. Okay, so this arm goes pretty flat to the body, right? This arm is almost on axis with the body. His right arm is sticking forward, right? So we have slightly different disposition of our insertions of the two different sides of the chest. This one is flat, going fairly straight out. The other side is advancing a little bit, right? So its insertion is up here. If I'm shooting through the biceps, the insertion is up here. And so what we're getting is we're getting an alignment of these three kind of characteristic insertions, right? So lowest one going highest in the armpit, and then this clavicular section going furthest out, and this lower one coming down here. And what we get is we get almost a triangle or a pyramid as it shoots towards its insertion. Right? That begs for me to go in and put the bicep over top of this so that we don't get confused as to the precedence of what's coming where. Right? So bicep is going to go in front of this. So all of that is going behind the biceps. Okay, likewise biceps here. And you can see quite clearly the distinction here. So all of that is coming back behind this bicep. Okay, so those are the two sides of the chest, and you guys will see me work on this in 3 dimensions and see how I approach it. So all of this is kind of quite 2D, despite my attempts to make it look like a pyramid, but you will see it in ZBrush, so that will help clarify some of this, I hope, for you. Okay, so that's 2 cents about the chest. As we move along the clavicles, obviously we have the front deltoid coming in, right? So the front deltoid I'm going to do in cyan. And that's again going out behind the biceps on both sides. And we'll see more of this when we get to the back view. Other characteristic things that we see in the front view that I want to point out before we flip over to the next view is the rectus abdominis. This has the asymmetry that I was just talking about. So crazy asymmetry going down, and then the big 40 ounce is quite prominent. And you can see from the lighting the convexity of it. So pay attention to those things, and hopefully the lighting can also expose for you some of the convexity of the actual packs of abdominal muscle themselves, especially in these kind of facing views. You really get a sense for how much volume there is to those. Okay, last thing is to mention the biceps and the triceps and the interaction here, right? So biceps coming in, and then we have up underneath we have the lats and what's called the teres major going in. So this volume right here coming up as the back wall of the armpit, and then this volume here coming in from the biceps and what is the coracobrachialis. All right, so all of these are going to be anterior, really, if we just kind of consider it like that. And then going back behind those is the triceps. Right, so the triceps is going to go back behind those two. Okay, and we can kind of see the interlocking here. The lats coming down. I'm changing up the colors, so excuse me. Biceps coming up, and then I'll just mirror the colors and I'll go cyan. Triceps coming back. Okay, let's just look forward and see the critical things to attend to in the back as we start to work on these. Okay, so in the back we have to first drop our landmarks in for these, right? We're looking at the acromion process, this big square, spine of the scapula going down, and the medial border. And remember, the spine of the scapula is an elevation on the skeleton, right? And so it can look like a big bump. And it's not razor sharp always, but we have to kind of infer some of its travel from the acromion process and the medial border. So we'll see it there, and you can see it here. And in this view, you can see acromion process, and the medial border of the scapula is actually starting right here and coming down, right? And the spine of the scapula is going right through here. All right, this arm is raised quite a bit, so we're getting a good angle in the rotation of the scapula. Okay, so those are the angles that you need to look for there as far as landmarks go. Look for 7th cervical vertebra here. And look, you can see it pop out right there. Bam, going straight into profile. Okay, that's really good for the landmarks. You can't see them popping out too much, but you can see the influence they have on the wrinkles in the aponeurosis down there. Iliac crest coming back. You see it right here. And posterior superior iliac spines are sitting right here. Okay, and from the front, that's what we're looking at, fat, like so. Okay, and now just to talk about some of the critical masses to attend to as you sculpt this, or prepare to sculpt this. Spinal erectors, man, you can't miss them on this guy. Look at how voluminous they are. Here's the lateral mass that I was talking about going up. Likewise on this side. Central mass going up from in between the posterior superior iliac spines. You can look in this view, even better angle to assess these. And this is what I was saying about this dead space where there's outside the lateral to this volume of spinal erectors, you'll start to see the ribs. Right, so on the raised arm, the lats are pulled quite thin, and so you see bottom 4 ribs. So spinal erector is quite powerful. Big forms to attend to. Next, let's look at the trapezius. So trapezius, we have all our landmarks laid out for it already. Acromion, look at this little branch coming off the acromion. Bam, grabbing on right there. And then we have this bit from the spine of the scapula going up and grabbing on here. And then we have the tail coming down like here. And on this side, you can see tail going up like this. And in this view, you can reconcile it a little better. and down. Okay, I won't put all the fibers in, but you get the idea. That's where the trapezius is going. Lats, if you look carefully, you can see the border of the lats coming over top here, right at that angle. And again, in this view, it's a little less pronounced, but we can kind of triangulate it from our other views to be right in there. I'll just quickly change colors to show it to you again. Right there, and fanning back and down, but remember it's thin, it's very thin. And so what we're getting in both areas, both sides, is we're getting a huge mass of serratus anterior coming out from underneath it. Right, so I'll change colors for the serratus anterior. We would go with, how about cyan? Why not? So serratus anterior is going to continue out like this, right? So you want to have some continuation, you want to have coherence between these digits that are sticking out and the mass coming back underneath the lats, right? And they don't necessarily have to line up perfectly with the back border, the medial border of the scapula, for reasons that I've explained in the anatomy course, if you remember that. Okay, that's serratus anterior mass on both sides. Look at that. Okay, lastly, we'll talk about the deltoid. And this, because in this view, we really can see all three heads of the deltoids. So in red, we'll go up and we'll just talk about how we expect to see the medial head coming off the lateral border of the acromion, kind of going down to the lowest point out here. And then you get kind of some muscle coming off the anterior and posterior borders of the acromion. All right, they have a little bit of muscle as well. And then you get the full separate heads, which is the rear head, which is actually looking slightly attenuated, like this. Because remember, it has tendon that takes it all the way back to the spine of the scapula, and the anterior head is going back to the clavicle. Okay, this is going to be an intensive anatomy review for everybody, so I hope it is just that, anatomy review. And if you're learning it as you go, it's going to be quite intense. But hopefully all of this will start to sink in conjunction with sculpting the forearms, right? Because when you start to look at all these and really work hard in 3D to get this to be right, then some of it will become intuitive for you. Okay, so those are the deltoids. We'll just look at the external obliques as they come back, and then we'll be almost finished with analyzing this guy's musculature. Okay, so the external obliques, we remember coming off of the front here, originating down here, originating on the iliac crest. They're spiraling back to grab onto the ribs. So we're looking at a mass of those in here, creating that form and creating this form. This is a little skin and fat as well. So if the iliac crest is right here, external obliques are coming up like this. And then this is gluteal muscle down here. Okay. And on this side is where we get to see the really nice twisting mass of the external obliques. And a really nice volume to the latissimus dorsi and the teres major up here. All right, I haven't said much about the teres major, which you know is a critical muscle for me. Everybody knows that I love the teres major. It's just not flexed at all in this pose. So it's just really contributing to this this mass that we see in the armpit. So really, because he's not pulling his arms down, we're not seeing any of the tube of muscle pop out. But he is there, and he's contributing to this volume. Okay, so that is the most of the critical muscles and things that we're seeing in these views. Anything else that pops out to me as I look at it? Just one more thing to help you along the way is to remember the interlocking of the triceps with the deltoid and the teres major, right? So remember, this long head of the tricep comes back and grabs onto the scapula, right? It's what I was saying in the previous page, is that it goes to the back and all of these guys come up to the front, right? So you get this overlap here, which is again something beautiful that we would see in a bark drawing, right? We'd see this nice kind of exchange between the arm and the lats going down. Okay, so that's it for this view. These images are going to be in your download for your assignment. These are not directly correlated to the pose that you're sculpting, but I wanted to give those to you for additional information on what goes on in here, because one shoulder, this is close to what his right shoulder is looking like, and actually this is close to what his left shoulder is doing in the pose. Right, one arm is roughly straight out and the other arm is roughly advancing. So this should help you roughly get an idea of what's going on with the angles in the clavicle against the kind of the upper masses of the chest and the front deltoid. Okay, so again, very interesting pics, and I'll probably reference these in some of your reviews depending on how you do. Okay, and now a quick tour of the female torso that you guys are going to be working on for this week's assignment. So for this fragment, it's going to be very similar actually to what we just looked at, in that they're both quite muscular, both arms raised. So to give you a chance to almost do almost a one-for-one comparison between male and female form. With the exception of she's actually pretty lean, and most females wouldn't be this defined. But you'll still get a chance to investigate the difference in kind of proportions between pelvis and rib cage, and kind of widths of the hips. Although our fragments will probably end up being cut off about here. Although for her, since we have reference down that far, you guys can cut it off down here if you wish. So you can sculpt her bum out. The male torso is cut off a little bit higher. Okay, and probably cut off the arms right about here. And I'll show you how to do all this in the working examples. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight the critical things. I'm not going to do a complete anatomy review of this because it's so close to the other one. But as I see them and as they jump out, I'll mention them. So first thing, remember boobs. Breasts are important. They will cover the bottom edge of the pectoralis major. Pectoralis major is still there, doing the exact same thing, kind of going from here, converging up to the arm. It's just covered by breasts. Okay, so that's going to be important. We have a little bit of costal cartilage coming out here that we didn't see on the male, right? So we have to really see how that looks as we start to sculpt it, right? So it's poking out and it's giving us this little depression underneath the costal cartilage before we get to the rectus abdominis. Okay, so keep an eye out for that. This side is actually, so we have flexion in the external obliques on this side, so we're getting crunch and we're getting stretch here. So I expect costal cartilage. I expect digitation here, and we can start to see some digitations. And look at the edges of the external obliques here and here. Kind of do a comparison with what we had in the male model. Serratus anterior, very nice. Look at the nice interchange. Look at the nice flow of the lats going up. So kind of coming up. You see them going over top of the teres major right here. Those are the forms that we're seeing. So teres major, latissimus dorsi, and that's inserting into the arm right here, and then long head of the tricep is going back here. This is the rear deltoid, biceps, and coracobrachialis is in there. What else do we see? Kind of see the greater trochanter popped out here. We haven't mentioned that because we'll worry about hips and things later, but if you get to it, you kind of see the point of the greater trochanter sticking out. As we work around the back, we start to see the line of the latissimus dorsi coming down, and right about here we would expect the iliac crest going back, but characteristic of females is, even very lean females, is hip fat, right? So they're carrying flank fat right up here, which hides a lot of the iliac crest. And also the iliac, remember the external obliques are kind of going in to a relatively thinner rib cage, right? So they're not as blocky on the sides as a man. Okay, what else do we see? We can look at these landmarks here. Acromion is sitting in this depression. Acromion is sitting in this depression underneath these skin folds. See the teres major coming off here. Rear deltoid right here. Right? Pay attention to those in your sculpts. Little bulge of the trapezius, and you can see the edge of the tail of the trapezius coming down here, and spinal erectors going down. Okay, in the back view, just what I was showing you in the other side. We have these guys, teres major, and we see a lot of action actually happening in the striations in the trapezius. Capture those if you're able to. Okay, both shoulders are fairly pulled out, so rhomboids and everything are very thin. And actually the tail of the trapezius is very thin as well, because it's pulled a long ways from the spine. Okay, let's see, any other things that are notable in this back view? Quite smooth in here, which is kind of a contribution of the flank fat. You can see how the flank fat is kind of filling this in. Posterior superior iliac spines right here. And moving back around the front, we can see some really nice shape right here. So that's some beautiful gesture and a pretty defined iliac crest in this front third. So we'll try to capture that and investigate some of the subtlety in this area, because we're seeing a little bit of external oblique and then some costal cartilage in here. Okay, so that's the quick tour of her anatomy as it stands in this pose, and there's a lot of stuff exposed there, so I hope you guys can work through it and kind of learn from the male torso example and do that first, and then tackle this, because there's a bit more subtlety in this one, but a lot of stuff is still exposed. So in some ways this is still well, I'm not going to say it's an easy exercise because it's not easy, it's hard, but that's what we're here for.